Hello, hello. How lovely to see so many of you here. And we're sorry about the hike across the car park. As you all might have seen, there's an awful lot going on today. Not least of all, very excitingly, the Theatre on the Fly opening this evening as well. So you've been very patient. My name is Kate Mosse, and I am doing many of the pre-performance talks, which has been a great pleasure. And one of the things that's been so exciting about all of the talks that we've had this year, and indeed the season so far, is of course that it is the 50th anniversary season. And what the theatre has been doing is trying to have references to the past, but also have some of the very greatest writers, directors, actors to be here to celebrate 50 years of this wonderful theatre that we all love so much, but also to be setting in motion the things going forward and the things for the future. So it seems incredibly appropriate and wonderful to have here today Trevor Nunn. Yeah, I think a round of applause, absolutely. Thank you. There we are, you see. My job is done, Trevor. I can go.
I was going to say after that introduction, what on earth am I doing here?
But
there we are.
And of course, you will all, of course, either be going in to see Kiss Me Kate or have seen it already. Could I just ask who has already been in? Oh, very good. There you are. So, and the others, you're all going in soon, I hope. Excellent. Oh, tonight. Good. Very good. So, of course, you will know that Trevor Nunn was one of the, I think, the youngest ever artistic director of the RSC.
I believe that is my claim to fame, yes.
And the longest serving?
I think it's it. And the longest serving, yes.
This is
So
double.
probably those two things are connected. Yes, I was completely flabbergasted when at the age of 27, Peter Hall said to me, "I'm leaving and I want you to take over." And I said no, very emphatically, 3 times.
And then the cock crew.
In a kind of biblical way.
Yes.
Yes. And I don't know, eventually I was beaten down, and I found myself running the company for 18 years. So. Which
was, I mean, an extraordinary achievement. And then, of course, you went on to be director of the National Theatre.
I did, for a shorter period of time.
That was
sort of 6.5.
I think time shrinks as we all get older, probably. Maybe it was that.
Yeah, so I vowed that I would only do it for 5 years, and I had to go on for a little bit longer. But I was aware at the National that I was a bridge, and I was very happy to be there.
But one of the things that, I mean, when I was trying to look at what particular productions to mention of yours in this rather rambling introduction, I think we can all agree, that it was actually impossible to choose because your list of credits, as it were, is exceptional, from world premieres, from new writing, from reinterpretations of classics. And in a way, that's why it's wonderful to be here to talk to you about something like this. Of course, you know the Chichester stage from Cyrano, and of course Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which was a wonderful production that opened last season. And now here you are. And I noticed on the 50th anniversary YouTube film that the theatre had made, that you said this rather wonderful thing, that you said you directed 30 Shakespeares and 20 musicals, so surely the time has come to combine the two. Is that actually how it happened, or did you come to the theatre and say, this is what I'd like to do for you guys?
No, it actually isn't a very simple and straightforward story. It is absolutely true that I've now done 30 of the 37 Shakespeares and have a great determination to fill in the other 7 if I possibly can. And I was counting up just 18 months ago, and I have indeed done 20 different musicals, and therefore when Chichester said, "Hey, will you come and do Kiss Me Kate?" It had the ring of inevitability about it, that it was sort of a move that would finally make sense of my odd career of bringing the two things together, the Shakespeare musical. But no, I first saw Kiss Me Kate in 1953, 1954, when it was filmed. And I was very youthful and hugely impressionable. And I remember coming away from that film thinking, that's what I want to do with my life.
Oh, really?
I want to be involved in such backstage shenanigans, and I want to appear on stage, and so it made a very, very big impression on me. But
can you remember what particularly it was?
I think most of all, it was that wonderful cinema actor Howard Keel, who did a number of the great musical movies at the time. And he was just brilliantly flamboyant and roguish. I mean, seemingly, I thought at the time, very, very good as a Shakespearean. I've watched the film back in more recent years, and that's not altogether true. But I mean, just an absolutely stunning musical performer and a man of great wit. But I remember so much from that film. The great Petruchio song soliloquy, Where is the Life That Late I Led? They did something absolutely bizarre. They protruded way out into the audience, a kind of promontory stage, a pier of stage with the audience all around it. And Howard Keel sang this song kind of sort of chatting to audience all the way around him. I was so struck by that when, incredibly precociously, at the age of 18, I formed a small local theatre company and did a production of Hamlet, because I thought I should start with something easy. I built a promontory out into the audience so that all the Shakespeare soliloquies would be from there. That only Hamlet went out onto that promontory for to be or not to be, and was absolutely direct address to the audience. And some people were horrified by it, and some people were hugely excited by it. But a direct influence was Kiss Me Kate and Howard Keel doing that. But it was actually at Stratford upon Avon, that I first thought what a good idea it would be to do Kiss Me Kate, because I kept wanting the RSC to do something that much more populist, to reach out to a wider audience, if at all possible. And I did a production of The Comedy of Errors, for which we wrote a musical score. And I had the temerity to adapt certain sections of Shakespeare's text into singable lyrics. And well, it had Judi Dench and Francesca Annis and Michael Williams and Roger Rees in the cast, so maybe it wasn't that much of a surprise. But I mean, it became an absolute cult hit, and we took it to London, and there was talk that it should go to Broadway, and we televised it, and so on. And I thought it would be so good if we could once again prove that a group of classical actors could do a major musical. And so I had the notion that we should do Kiss Me Kate at Stratford, on the Stratford stage. And there was a rights issue. Somebody owned it and didn't want to let the RSC do it, and therefore my moment passed and it never happened. But about 10 years later, Adrian Noble, who by then was running the company, did do the RSC production of Kiss Me Kate very, very successfully. I was delighted that eventually happened. But then, many, many years later at the National, once again, I wanted to do one single company who would do a Shakespeare and a musical. I'd done it several times by then. I'd done it with The Blue Angel and Measure for Measure, and Troilus and Cressida and Candide. Just getting one group of multi-talented actors and proving that they could do both disciplines. But in order to break down that completely unnecessary barrier that had been erected, that legitimate is one kind of theatre and musical is a lower form of human life. And I've never believed that, and I've always wanted there to be a cross-fertilisation between the two. So at the National, I wanted to do Cole Porter's Kiss Me Kate, with an accompanying Shakespeare. And once again,
you were thwarted.
I was thwarted because a production had just opened on Broadway.
Right.
And the plan was to bring it to London, and indeed it eventually came to London. So I wasn't able to do it. So when Chichester said, "Will you do Kiss Me Kate?" I said yes before the end of the sentence. Just in case somebody said, "No, we've got in ahead of you and got the rights."
That is extraordinary. Does that mean, therefore, that you were ready, you know, with your notepad coming out of your pocket all ready to go, you'd got your vision of it? Or was it actually made it quite burdensome because you've thought about it for 20, 30 odd years?
No, I think those notions of doing it previously had never got to the point of sitting down with script and score and studying and examining what is the vocal range of this, and therefore exactly what the casting process has to be, and so on. I'd never gone to that degree of detail. But of course, the other distinctive thing about saying yes to Chichester is, and I thought about this around about 5 minutes after I had said yes, that doing Kiss Me Kate on a huge open stage presents a very particular set of challenges, because unquestionably the show is written for a proscenium theatre. Yeah. It's written with the assumption that cloths will fly in and you know, backings for different scenes will be able to replace each other instantly. And not only is there a great big open stage at Chichester, but there is no fly gallery of any kind.
No wings, no flight.
So you have to find different solutions. And
is that where you started then, the idea of the physical space, rather than the idea of how you wanted to tell the story?
Partly that, but partly my starting point was the same as the starting point for when I directed the Taming of the Shrew at Stratford, the RSC, in 1967. Although I'd already done it once before, I'd done it at university. And the starting point was similar. And it's Shakespeare's starting point, which is a group of travelling players turn up in an area, and a lord says to them, "We've found this drunk man, will you do a play for him and treat him as if he is a lord?" So the whole thing is a spoof, but the thing is, Shakespeare wrote a play within a play, and the play, he never lets us forget, is being presented, it's being enacted by a troupe of travelling players. Well, that's the Shakespeare premise, and it's the Cole Porter premise, because the opening number of the show, the Shrew, that is being presented during the course of Kiss Me Kate, is a group of travelling players, are we? Exactly that famous number. That we travel all around Italy, you know, we open in Venice.
It's such a wonderful song, though.
It's a wonderful song.
It's the ennui as they open the trunk.
Lively song, but it of course gives us absolutely the technique of how we must do the show here. That once again, it's a group of travelling players who are creating it out of nothing.
And when you think all of these, so firstly you've said yes before the phone has gone down, then 5 minutes later you've thought about this space. How do you then move to the sense of how are you going to do it? How are you going to cast your people? How old are they going to be? All of those decisions. What comes first in the process that makes it real, makes your play real?
In this particular situation, it's a very, very simple answer to the question, because what you do is you gather around you the best creative team you can possibly imagine. And I had done a production of Cole Porter's Anything Goes in London, actually, when I couldn't get the rights to do it, I did Anything Goes instead. And working with me on that production was the most sensationally brilliant choreographer who you all know in Chichester called Stephen Mear, and the most wonderful musical director who I've worked with many, many times in my career called Gareth Valentine. Yes. And to have those two holding my left hand and my right hand as one begins to talk about the project means that you know, it's dance demand, it's music demand, it's acting demand, and the way that they interlink are part of every single conversation. And I talk about those two at the highest possible level. I mean, if credits didn't have to be in a list, then our names would be absolutely adjacent on the same line. And the name that would also be on the same line is wonderful, wonderful designer Rob Jones, who designed Cyrano de Bergerac here for me. Rob has done a number of important bits of work, including a musical in Chichester. Well, if you've already, if you've got in your production team somebody who knows everything there is to know about the Chichester stage, then you know you proceed linking arms, shoulder to shoulder.
Merrily you go along.
Yes.
But is that a different...
solve the problems together.
Sorry, is that a different thing, Trevor, for musicals? Is there a level of collaboration that is essential to creating the wonderful big things that you are so well known for? Is that more than for a piece of Shakespeare or a new piece of writing?
Well, I would reckon that doing a major Shakespeare on a big stage and doing a major musical on a big stage are projects of pretty much the same order of difficulty. The complexity of those disciplines, the number of things that one has to bear in mind, the number of things that one has to juggle, and so that you don't feel, oh, good, I'm doing a Shakespeare next, that's much easier. Yeah. And you don't feel, oh, thank God I'm doing a musical, yes. That's so much easier than a Shakespeare. But frequently you do feel, it's wonderful that I'm about to do a contemporary play that takes place in a room and there are 5 characters.
Yes.
Because
yes. And nobody will sing, you think.
The sheer number of considerations are far, far, far less. I'm not saying such things are undemanding, but it's...
Well, there's a sort of simplicity of decision-making, presumably.
Level of effort. So, yes.
And when you're bearing all of that in mind, is there a sense, therefore, that you have a type of singer or dancer or person who can move or speak in a certain way, or individual people that you then think, I must people my production with those? Because often with this horrible phrase, straight theatre, there is a sense that this role is made for, you know, such and such, and particularly a new piece of work. That's often an actor is in someone's mind.
It's... The question you're asking is actually, it's not capable of a very quick, simple, straightforward answer, and it's for this reason, that when I did become involved in musical theatre, I kept wanting to fight the battle that people cast into musicals could act in every bit as sophisticated and refined and detailed a way as people who made their careers without singing. That it should be entirely possible to reach those levels of accomplishment. And this project came most of all to fruition when I began to develop the idea of Les Miserables, the great Hugo novel. And that was extraordinary that that came my way, because only a few years previously I had done at the Aldrich Theatre with the Royal Shakespeare Company a massive adaptation of a Dickens novel, Nicholas Nickleby. And the intention of that piece of work was to take everything to do with the mugging and the generalization and the exaggeration out of Dickens' presentation, and to say, look, Dickens is the greatest English dramatist who never wrote a play. His observation of character is phenomenally detailed, and we must respond to that. We must respond to it as if we were approaching a Shakespeare. Once we'd done Nickleby, then when a proposal came along that we, the company, should become involved in doing a musical based on a great French 19th century novel, then the same considerations were uppermost, that we must do a musical that will have every bit the same seriousness and the same complexity and the same number of levels as if we were watching a Shakespeare play. We're not saying to the audience, please, leave your brains in the cloakroom, or you know,
or
come
that it's
on,
froth.
hey folks,
I mean,
it's a musical, so you know, it's a different kind of judgment. We were trying to say, don't give us any quarter, make the same judgments, and happily the show is still running.
But I mean, without Les Miserables, none of that would, this would be an odd conversation to have, because I think it changed everything, surely.
Well, it certainly did for me, but it became more and more a consideration, the musical work that I did, and then, you know, very, very much more recently, doing a great musical by Stephen Sondheim. You know, the demand in every lyric is that it must be enacted to the smallest degree of character detail. It's written for that. It's not forget about everything else. This is show business. It's not that at all. And I mention the Stephen Sondheim because I made a long search for who should play the leading woman in the Sondheim that I did, A Little Night Music. And one day, an extraordinary, very tall, very funny, very intelligent woman came into audition. I hadn't come across her before. She wasn't any kind of famous name. And she did this absolutely brilliant audition, not only musically, but I ask everybody to do an acting piece for me, and we work on the acting piece. And the piece that she chose was from a Chekhov. And she was extraordinary. She was absolutely extraordinary, doing this multi-layered piece of acting. And I said, I don't want to look any further. I found her. I found her. Oh God, please, please don't make me audition anybody else.
Yes.
I found her. And I cast her. And she's called Hannah Waddingham. And Hannah Waddingham it is who is playing Catherine Lily Vanessa in Kiss Me Kate tonight. Because she has that multiple ability. There were many other people in the cast of that Sondheim who would be candidates to be in a project like this, but they're all off doing other and different things. There are people in this cast who I have worked with doing just a Shakespeare.
Right.
People who I've worked with doing a Shakespeare and a musical. people who I would love to work with in the future doing just a Shakespeare. But the connection, and it was a very rigorous audition process, but the connection between music and heightened language text is a constant, and the people that some of you have seen and some of you are about to see can all master those disciplines.
And one of the things that I thought was so wonderful was that it was very hard to say that there was a particular theme or not a particular theme. It felt like the most coherent production to watch, so that it was about the blurring of art and
You're just
live.
giving it away that you've seen it too.
Well, of course I've seen it, Trevor. Would I come here and talk to you without having seen it? It would be a disgrace. But the thing is that I think often with those, you know, I was reading about how Cole Porter had been writing it in the first place, in 1948 when it first came out, and that sense that, not that it was an answer to Oklahoma, but the idea that the relative respect and value of both the language and the text and the musical numbers and the singing were equal, so they were properly integrated, rather than it being a show where people sort of declaimed and then there was a song down the back.
Yeah, I mean, Cole Porter wrote Kiss Me Kate at a very, very interesting moment in the development of the American musical. It was just after the Second World War, and at the very end of the Second World War, a show had come along which bemused everybody to begin with, and then became a huge success, and then became a definition of the new American musical, which was Oklahoma by Rodgers and Hammerstein. And to give you an example of how weird people thought the project was, that it should be set in Oklahoma. I mean, people thought a Broadway musical is not just a musical that happens on Broadway, it's a musical that happens about Broadway. I mean, you know, it's about Broadway. How else do you have songs?
Exactly.
You know?
Sequins.
And therefore, it was an extraordinary arrival on the scene. And one critic went to see it in an out-of-town tryout, and famously sent a telegram back to head office, and the telegram read, no gals, no laughs, no hope, no chance. I mean,
because it's dark.
It's,
I mean, apart
it's
from
not a
everything
show.
else.
I mean, you know, because it's about these people who live in some way out Midwest place, and you know, it can't possibly work. So that had just happened, and Cole Porter had triumphed with Anything Goes, just coming out of the Depression, but hadn't had a really big successful show since then. And I think he was very, very nervous, aware that this Rodgers and Hammerstein thing had happened, knowing that his instinct was indeed to do with show business and to do with that previous age of musical theatre, but yearning for something that would have that much more reality, that much more rootedness. And he turned down the offer of Kiss Me Kate to begin with, but when eventually they rewrote the book, he came back to it and said, this is the show that I want to, this is the one I want to commit to. And I think what fascinated him was that it could exist on two different levels of reality. That there is the story that happens to these people in life, the backstage story, the story of who these actors are, what their relationships are, what their temperaments are, what their flaws and failings are. And then they go on stage and transform themselves into characters in an onstage event. And of course, what's fascinating about the piece is that a lot of the onstage event reflects their behavior offstage or is influenced by their behavior offstage. Therefore, I don't know if any of you have ever seen a play by Pirandello. Pirandello, 6 characters in search of an author.
It was at the Minerva a couple of years ago.
And tonight we improvise and so on. He was an Italian dramatist writing at this time who was completely fascinated with the limit of where does something real end and play acting begin? Where does play acting end and life begin? What is that crossover? There's another play called Henry IV, where you believe for the first 40 minutes of the play that you're in the 14th century or something, and then you discover that it's people play acting and actually they're modern people, and why are they doing it? And so he's constantly fascinated by that crossover. Well, Cole Porter became fascinated by that crossover. You know, how much are these roles of Catherine and Petruchio influencing and motivating the offstage lives of Fred and Lily, and vice versa? How much have they always used their personal lives in their acting life, and how on this occasion is it proving to be uncontrollable? Sorry, that all sounds very, very intellectual. I mean, that's an analysis of the material that he was dealing with. But therefore, there's an offstage musical style and an onstage musical style. There's an offstage lyrical style and an onstage musical style. Cole Porter, who I think is an absolute precursor of Stephen Sondheim in terms of the genius of mischievous wit in lyrics. I mean, it's absolutely wondrous what he was able to rhyme with what totally unexpectedly he is able to deliver as a rhyme. He uses certain modern references in his Taming of the Shrew work, so that he's saying this is a contemporary musical of a Renaissance story. So once again, there are wheels within wheels within wheels. And when I tell you that the book of the show was written by, to begin with, a woman called Bella Spewak, who was a very successful comedy writer. She had been married to a man called Sam Spewak, and they had been a comedy writing duo, inseparable. They did everything together. They then had a horrible falling out, and they divorced. Bella Spewak began to write the Kiss Me Kate book and felt at certain points, I'm out of my depth, I need help, who do I need? Oh God, I have to talk to Sam. She got Sam back and they collaborated together on the writing, collaborated in more and more and more detail and more excitement about what they were doing. And after the show opened, they forgot about their divorce and went back together and lived together.
So life imitating art, imitating art.
It's yet one more imitation, life to art, art to life, that is part of the story.
But I mean, it is so very layered. Is it very tempting, though, to almost cartoon it? So if they're travelling players, that when they come on the stage, they're not such great dancers. Do you feel that that is sometimes the way that Kiss Me Kate's been done, you know, to sort of undermine them as performers?
I would hope not, and I would imagine that anybody who'd ever been involved with a previous production, if I said, yeah, I think sometimes people have said that people can't really dance, would slowly walk towards me with their hands in a strangling position. No, I would say the choreographic demands are pretty ultimate and pretty famous. You know, that when the show opened on Broadway, it was a huge success on Broadway. In those days, a show that ran for 2 years was a giant success. Yeah, I mean, absolutely giant. This whole nonsense of things running for 20 is absolutely unheard of, totally unheard of. in Cole Porter's day, just nobody ever considered such a thing. So giant success, and then it came over to England and again was very successful.
And an extraordinary number of, you know, those wonderful songs that have escaped their context, so that people know the songs, even if they don't know that, you know, It's Too Darn Hot comes from this. Is it tempting, again, as a director, to just do a little twist to it, to try and make them your own, as it were, when you've got those big iconic songs?
Well, again, it's probably not one generalized answer. I mean, there's a song, I won't spoil anything for anybody if I tell you there's a song called Wunderbar, which you would frequently hear on Friday night as music night, or whatever, on the BBC. You know, it's a very, very famous duet, Wunderbar, and you know, people would sing it in high baritone and magnificent soprano and so on. Actually, it's a wonderful bit of Cole Porter pastiche of operetta, and it's a deliberate pastiche that it's these two people backstage remembering that they once did a show together, and it was this appalling old operetta, and oh God, how did it go? And there was a song in it. What was that song we sang? And then they begin to remember that song. Well, it's deliberately a pastiche of that particular ethos. Wonderfully done, and it's meant to be amusing in the show, and it triggers a further set of memories for those two people. So it's absolutely fitting in the context. But just after it, there's another very famous Cole Porter song called So in Love. You can hear So in Love in constant cabaret performances, people, artists who are, you easily hear it on X Factor. You know, it's just a very, very famous song, and you can hear it out of context. But in context, it is a woman realizing, oh no, I'm still in love with him. Oh God, and I hadn't thought that, and I'm being overwhelmed by it, and it's very, very touching. However, you can't sing it in such a way that you just sort of murmur it and don't deliver it musically. You have to respect its musical magnificence, but personalize it as well.
So in a strange sort of way, it's the songs that are bigger than their context, or have escaped the bounds of their play. It's actually putting them back into context is the challenge.
Yeah, I mean,
and the excitement.
I did several productions of the wonderful Gershwin score, Porgy and Bess, and there are so many songs from Porgy and Bess that people know, the general populace know. Therefore, they know Porgy and Bess. It's just they don't know they know Porgy and Bess. They would never realize that all those songs came from that score. Yes, to some extent, what we are bringing famous material back into its context, but not delimiting to the point where when Cole Porter wants a bit of material absolutely to take off and be full-out show business, that it can still be that.
And did people, when you were starting to rehearse with everybody, did people come with their own sort of their own background track of certain songs in their minds. Could you see the exuberance sometimes when you just were right at the beginning of the rehearsal process?
I would reckon that by the first day of rehearsal, 90% of the company already knew 90% of the score. Yeah, I mean, in their sense memory, or because they'd checked out on it, or checked up on it already.
Is that good, or is that tricky? Do you have to sort of strip things back and start again, or do you let people have their heads?
We had a thrilling rehearsal period, which began improvisationally, and we did a Shakespeare workshop, and so people couldn't have just had preconceptions that went straight into the show, if you see what I mean. Everything was discombobulated from the word go.
And thrown up in the air and see if it was. And we've obviously talked about the language and the blurring of boundaries and the mirroring between the Shakespeare story and the Backshade story, all of those things. One of the things that obviously is an easier question to ask if you're talking just about Taming of the Shrew is, of course, the overused phrase, but the battle of the sexes. Actually how you interpret what battle is actually going on. And of course, we've had many reinterpretations. You, of course, did Taming of the Shrew in 1967, and we now know you did an earlier one before that. But also we've had, Phyllida Lloyd doing an all-female version of Shrew, and of course Ed Hall and Propeller doing an all-male version. But this is very much set in the texture and the context of 1948, isn't it? So does that mean that actually you have to not bring a 21st century sensibility to some of those lines, or how did you approach that side of it, the gender wars, as it were?
I think the best way for me to answer it is to talk a little bit, to begin with, about the productions of the Taming of the Shrew that I did, rather than Kiss Me Kate, because even at university, there was a sense amongst undergraduates that there was something a little bit locked up in its own period about this play. And I remember saying, as emphatically as I could at that time, look, I don't think Shakespeare is ever guilty of that degree of insensitivity. Merchant of Venice, is it an anti-Semitic play? No, of course it isn't. Shakespeare has got so many ingredients in the play that justify Shylock as well as critical things of him. And Shakespeare shows constantly that we as human beings are flawed, and there is goodness and badness, and those things need to balance out. So he doesn't deny that there is a male-female battle that will go on from generation to generation and rebalance itself. But I think he gives us enough clues, and this is a very early play by Shakespeare, he gives us enough clues right at the beginning to tell us that when Petruchio meets Kate, when Kate meets Petruchio, it's a love story. They get it, they get each other immediately, and thereafter they're going to fight out what terms they're going to be on, but something has happened. Something has happened that means that as far as Kate is concerned, he's not the same as all the other guys that she doesn't want anything to do with. She resists, but up to a point. And when I did the Stratford production, it was not only on that basis, but we took it one stage further, that gradually what they discover is that they've got the same sense of humor. And that they can be extreme, and they can alarm people and kick over the traces and be socially irresponsible exactly the same way as each other. It's the instinct that they've got. Therefore, they will always be two against the world. They will always be the odd couple, but they share it. And therefore, the speech at the end of the play that Catherine makes is a declaration of love. And by the end of it, Petruchio is, of course, he's overwhelmed that declaration of love should have come his way to that extent. That you know, there's a wench is one of the great understatements in literature. You know, you just are the most wonderful girl ever. Now, enough of that ingredient is in Kiss Me Kate. Enough of the ingredient that to say in the production of the Shrew that Fred Graham has done, it was always going to be that element that there's a love story between them, a developing love story. But of course, it gets overtaken by a developing anger story, an explosive confrontational story. And yet, bizarrely, what's going on backstage is a continuation of a love story. I don't think I can leave this man after all. So that ultimately, the real life story is what makes the last scene of the Shrew. Oh dear, I'm not going to tell you what happens. Sorry, spoil it. But it makes the last scene of the Shrew something that isn't about chauvinism and defeat and subjugation. It's about no, I can't finish the sentence because so many people are going, oh, he ruined it for us.
Well, that is tantalising, at least for everybody. No, but that's very. But just before we finish on this point, with the 40s setting, did you at any point think we will modernise that side of things, or did you feel absolutely, because it's written within the context of just after the Second World War, the refashioning of where people were and how they were behaving with each other, that actually the 40s sort of vibe, I suppose, about it was essential to how the dual story played out?
Absolutely essential, completely and totally essential. It would be an appalling mistake to say we are doing an updated Kiss Me Kate. I mean, everything about the musical style, everything about what was vastly popular music in 1948. You can't say people are bowled over by the same musical thing in 1990. You can absolutely love it nostalgically, but also there are hundreds of references through the script to the Second World War, to Hitler, to Truman and Dewey and the American Army and the FBI at that time, and so, you know, I mean,
yes, and it's just so complicated. It's so complex. I mean, it's very, very, very
unpick it and then rewrite it in a different way.
So you started off when we started talking about your relationship with Kiss Me Kate, how it had been one of those things so important to you with the pier going out right at the beginning, and how you'd taken references of that first, the Howard Keel that you'd seen. Have you enjoyed it? Has it lived up to it after all this time?
I said earlier that I'd got the best production team imaginable. I mean, they're very deep friends, Stephen and Gareth and Rob, and so, you know, totally enjoyable, and to have a cast that talented, and for everybody to know as they leave the stage that they have done a musical and to some extent a Shakespeare is a very fulfilling feeling for everybody.
I mean, you look like you're having a lovely time, but it's such a burden sometimes.
Sorry, I look just the same as I always look.
I meant in your face rather than your jeans, but there we go. No, but I mean, sometimes when there has been something that you have almost been, you know, it's been tiptoeing up behind you all these years, it could have just not been quite so much fun as you hoped it would be.
That's perfectly true. But no, we've had a very, very, very lovely time, and we're very fortunate. This is like a little commercial break, but we're very fortunate because the show has already got its London destination booked. So once again, Chichester goes to London, which is a very, very thrilling thing. But the show's going to they've announced it, so I'm not speaking out of turn. It goes to the Old Vic all the way across the Christmas period and into the New Year, and everyone's absolutely thrilled about it. Once again, Chichester in London, we're very, very happy.
And it is brilliant, because of course you're delivering both Shakespeare and musical from Chichester.
To Chichester, 50th anniversary.
50th
anniversary.
To the
Old Vic London Shakespeare Theatre.
Does it feel, you know, one of the wonderful things about the theatre when it opened, you know, 3rd of July 1962, it was the sense, it was founded on the sense of a festival of theatre, that people would come to see all sorts of things they wouldn't necessarily do. Does that in any way influence when you're doing something as huge as Kiss Me Kate and it's here as part of this season? Do you have that sense of how it sits with the other work? Or is it more just that there are many people around seeing different sorts of theatres and they bring those emotions into the theatre when they come to see it? You know, does it influence how you approach a piece?
I think what's happening at Chichester is completely and totally enviable and sensational as far as English theatre is concerned, because when you open the brochure for a season's work, the stunning variety, and now with the addition of a sort of totally new place, but experimental project-based theatre on the fly. I don't know whether that's intended for preservation, that it can go into a future year, but to have that variety of work, that seriousness at times, and comedic delight at times, and musical joy at times, and so it's wonderful for a major festival theatre to be doing that and proclaiming that. And as I've already said, equally wonderful, if not more wonderful, that at this time where we keep saying regional theatre is incredibly important in this country and is getting a raw deal at the moment, that Chichester has got this astonishing presence in London at the moment. Well, that's all power to Jonathan. I mean, who's the most wonderful artistic directorship that Jonathan Church is doing here. Just fantastic. I mean, Chichester is so lucky to have his guidance, because it's unparalleled, and long may he remain.
And I'm going to open it up to just a couple of questions, because we will have to give Trevor his stage back in a moment. But the last thing before I do that is, you know, you told this wonderful story about Kiss Me Kate in the first place. Are there other musicals or plays that are lurking there that you're going to, we can have you back in 5 years' time and you can say, at last I've done that, you know, your wish list?
It wouldn't be for here, the one that I do, because the one that I incredibly passionately want to do is a proscenium show, to the point.
We've got a new one, Trevor, over there. You can do it in there.
To the point where you absolutely can't do it any other way. But I'm terribly reluctant to say it, because if I do, immediately somebody else will buy the rights.
Ah, right, okay. Well, you can whisper it when we go off.
Yeah, but yes, there are projects that one yearns to do. I mean, there's one that I can say, because anybody and everybody in this business would feel exactly the same thing, and we'll all be trying to get the rights to do it, or trying to do it in a new way. And that's West Side Story. I mean, you know, West Side Story is the great 20th century musical.
Now, our stage could really do that, don't you think? It would be fantastic.
But it's not a possibility that Well, it's possibility in the sense that if you exactly and precisely replicate the original production, then you can do it, but otherwise you can't.
It's just tied up to, it's too
tied
prescribed.
up and you're not allowed to do anything new with it. Therefore, it wouldn't work on the stage.
It wouldn't work, right. Well, we will hope that we will then see what your next thing will be. And you're quite right not to say it. You never say things out loud. We can have a couple of questions, but only a couple, I'm afraid. Right, lady there and then young lady there.
Just wondered if you think the audience for musicals has changed, because I was lucky enough to see Howard Keel in Oklahoma, and then for years there was a snobbery about going to musicals. Everything you've said from a director's point of view about how they're equally challenging, I just wonder if you think the audience has changed.
I do. I think the audience has changed to the point where, when I did a small number of extremely difficult but wonderful classic musicals at the National Theatre, it really was thrilling to understand that not only did the demographic open up for the National Theatre, but vast numbers of people who would only normally want to see a classic play went to see a musical and became completely overjoyed. And the best thing at the really big, joyous musical experience is when everybody in the audience is cheering or standing together or whatever, and you know that they are from every kind of imaginable different walk of life and background and so on, but they have been united by the musical experience. I think there's nothing more joyous than that. And well, of course, Sondheim has had a huge amount to do with it, because gradually the English critics, who didn't want to have anything to do with musicals, had to acknowledge that with Sondheim, they were dealing with a mind who was absolutely as extraordinary and challenging as any dramatist they could ever nominate. And therefore, passionate reviews about Sondheim would happen. And then gradually, as they realized that Sondheim also did show business, you know, like Gypsy, or A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, or whole sections of Merry We Roll Along and of course Follies, gradually Sondheim sort of converted more and more of the serious critics to the musical experience.
Thank you. Young lady there.
As aspiring actresses, what advice would you offer us?
She'd like advice as an aspiring actress.
Oh.
Quite right.
Yeah.
But maybe afterwards. Is there another question about Kiss Me Kate?
Obviously, the answer to that question is that you have to be prepared to come to an audition, sing at the top of your voice, do a Shakespeare, do a Chekhov.
Can you do that?
And a couple of tap dances and maybe a bit of stand-up, you know. Should be all right.
Good luck. Gentleman down here, and then that will have to be the last one. Go ahead.
I'll take you back to a musical that you did in the West End, The Baker's Wife.
Yes.
It was not the best success in the world. Looking back, would you do it again?
I two answers to that question. Do you know, the Baker's Wife in London was an absolutely heartbreaking experience. I worked with Stephen Schwartz, the composer, who's now the most successful composer in the world, having done Wicked. And Stephen, this was long before Wicked. Stephen and I worked on the show together, and we did it out in the regions. We unveiled the production in Ipswich, in my hometown. And every performance, every single performance, was standing ovation and wild cheers and people queuing around the block to get in. I mean, it was just smashing. We brought it to London. Something about the title, but people hadn't heard anything about Stephen Schwartz, the baker's wife. We never had an audience of more than 60%, even on the first night. Oh, no. It was just no interest in it of any kind, and therefore a show that we completely believed in and which had that extraordinary ingredient where the end of the show is actually very, very unexpectedly moving. The people who did come and see it were absolutely delirious about it, but it came off after 10 weeks.
We thought it was lovely.
Thank you very much indeed.
Very good retrieval there, young man.
You are a discerning gentleman. I'm very, very pleased to make your acquaintance.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid
would I do it again? I tell you what I'd want to do. I really would love to make a film of it. You know all of those wonderful French films about life in a village in the south of France, yeah, Jean de Florette and all of that. Well, it's that world with musical ingredients. What a wonderful movie that would make.
Well, there's a thought. That will be the next project. I'm really sorry that we have to bring it to an end because truthfully this has been a masterclass and I think all of us who have already been in feel now very jealous of you who are all going to go in this evening because you have such a treat in store. The next pre-performance talk is on the 9th of July and I'll be talking to Jonathan Church. And then on the 12th of July, we will be in the Theatre on the Fly talking to critics. So you can come with rotten fruit, eggs, actually Michael Billington, Charles Spencer and Libby Purvis. They're all, who are all big supporters of Chichester. But then on the 19th of July, I'll be back here talking to Gareth Valentine, who Trevor's already mentioned. And I think that will be wonderful. And very importantly, the 8th of August is the post-show production talk for Kiss Me Kate. And all you need to do is, if you're in that night, stay behind in the auditorium. And if you're not, just come afterwards and join in there, because those ones are wonderful, because the cast takes part. But it really just remains for me to say that it has been a great honour to talk to Trevor Nunn, and extremely exciting that there's this production, this wonderful production here. But I think of all the things, some of the questions from the audience about, how audiences have changed, I think that one thing, the very surprisingly modest Trevor Nunn, because I think that you are one of the people that has entirely changed how musicals are seen, and we are all in your debt for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, Trevor Nunn.